today again. It's just such a treat to have this group together. New friends, old friends. It's a real pleasure for me to have a chance to share these ideas with you, these thoughts, and I suppose these emotions. Okay. So what I'd like to share today is some ideas that were recently inspired by. I had this last week a chance to join a meditation course from a program called Search Inside Yourself that spun out from Google. They started doing this, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 or 10 years ago as an internal program at Google called Search Inside Yourself, obviously search inside yourself. But it was the most popular program for employees that they'd ever run. So it dealt with the topic of emotional intelligence and how to build mindfulness of your own internal experience, better self-control, and how to build from there greater and greater capabilities for leadership and empathy and so forth. And then it spun off as a nonprofit organization, and now they run courses for businesses and individuals and so forth. So it's a little bit on the more expensive tier, as like in terms of meditation courses. A lot of my teachers, some of my teachers are, they teach only for free. They never accept any income. Some of them have small fees. This Search Inside Yourself is like a little bit more expensive. And then there's Deepak Chopra, way far out on that spectrum, where you can pay $10,000 for a weekend and attain enlightenment on the weekend. So this program, Search Inside Yourself, I had a chance to go through 3 mornings this week, and I just was very struck by how well designed it was, well organized it was. And so I'm going to not exactly plagiarize their content, but use it as sort of starting off points, a little bit more structure, as I'm still trying to organize some of the structure for future classes. The first topic that they dealt with, which I think is just a fantastic place to start, is this topic of emotional intelligence. And this is, these topics, a lot of these are rooted in, traditional, religious teachings, especially Buddhist teachings and so forth, but they're making tons of inroads into the business and psychology communities and so forth. They had a graph showing the number of studies on mindfulness that are done every year, and the number of new studies on mindfulness have been increasing exponentially for the last 20 years every year. So this last year there were 1,300 new studies on mindfulness. And what obviously a lot of these researchers, they're taking inspiration from traditional ideas, but then trying to validate them in their own experience. And so there's a growing amount of research validating these traditional practices. And a lot of it started with this reporter named Daniel Goldman, who began to dig in more deeply to some of these topics and to discuss the topic of emotional intelligence. And this is pretty widespread in the business communities and psychology communities. They talk about this, but basically emotional intelligence is your ability to understand your own and others' emotions, discern between them, like sort out, which emotion is which, and then act wisely on the basis of that information. So all 3 of these parts are important, right? You become aware of your own emotions and others' emotions. Not only that, you have some ability to sort them out and identify them, and then you can act appropriately and ethically and appropriately for your own and others' benefit on the basis of that knowledge. And so, well, the whole history of Western, science and rationality and so forth has all been based on the idea that humans are or should be rational creatures, right? The reality is that we are incredibly emotional creatures, and even our ability to make a decision properly, like this is good, this is bad, I want to do this would be a good future, this would be a bad future, those are actually emotional decisions. And really our reasoning is very much in service. Normally, it's very much in service of our emotional, our emotional senses, like trying to accomplish, um, beneficial goals for ourselves or others, even to the point that our emotions can utterly manipulate uh, reasoning and logic and so forth. And so you see people, ignoring ignoring science, ignoring any kind of reasoning and so forth, and just following, being driven by their emotions. So no matter whether we think of ourselves as a rational person or not, we really need to recognize that our emotions are a key core part of who we are. And one of the characteristics of emotions is that they're physical in a sense. They're very physiological, right? They get, when there's some anxiety, our palms sweat. So, um, if I'm not going to do this, but just as a thought experiment here, if I were to ask you to unmute right now and share with us what's the most personal experience you could imagine, and then I ask you to share that in front of the group, public group, right? So maybe your palms start sweating a little bit. You're like, start shifting in your chair. You're like, oh, okay, all right. You tense up a little bit. Okay, here it goes. And you can see it's a very visceral reaction. It's a bodily reaction. And that our body is very much involved in our thinking. Um, and we need to become aware of this if we're gonna know what's actually happening inside ourselves, if we're gonna be able to be realistic and sensitive about what's happening for other people, and if we're going to make reasonable decisions about on for the benefit of ourselves and others, we need to be very aware of these internal emotional states. It's a key critical part of the information that we need in our life. And so if you're like me, you sort of grew up in this very rational world and everything's just about information, well, emotions are information, and they can be misleading information, like any like any information. It can be a little bit misleading. I feel tense when I'm around this person. That must mean they're a bad person. No, probably not. um, our emotions can be misleading, but they're still really critically important um, information that we need to understand. And not only are they important, it's so satisfying, right? It's deeply satisfying to begin to connect with these emotions and to begin to nurture positive experiences, like an experience of well-being, and to begin to pacify and settle down all of these disturbing emotions: anxiety, fear, anger, self-hatred, self-doubt, all these kinds of things. Um, so that's the context that I'd like to kick us off with. And so what I'd like to do is now some we can treat it as an experiment. We can say it's a guided meditation, but whatever. It's just an experiment to sort of check in with ourselves and try to begin to become aware of the emotional state and our physical state and our mental state as we start our day. Well, for me, I'm starting my day, but if you're in Spain, maybe you're ending your day. But whatever's active right now in your internal experience, we'll just spend a few minutes with that, and I'll guide us through. So, what we can do is start by just finding a comfortable position for our body. And this really can be anything, any position that we find comfortable allows us to be a bit relaxed, but ideally without falling asleep. We're going to start by taking a deep breath in and a deep breath out. And as we breathe in, we can feel ourselves stretching internally a bit. Maybe we stretch our neck and shoulders a bit to make a bit more room for us to breathe in. And as we breathe out, we just relax, just allow ourselves to relax physically and mentally. Perhaps we feel some increased sense of relaxation through our body. As we breathe in, we can stretch, we are expanding a bit. And as we breathe out, we relax, we're contracting a bit. Small movements, but sometimes they can help us to feel our whole emotions, body, mind also stretching a bit or relaxing a bit. And then we can begin to become aware of our body, just however our body is feeling, areas of where we're contacting our seat, the feeling of our feet on the floor or wherever they are, the feeling of our hands. And just whatever sensations are arising within your body, comfortable, uncomfortable, neutral feelings. And we can begin to just ask ourselves, what's happening inside right now for us, physically, emotionally, mentally. Just try to give some words for in our mind, give some label or description internally to what's happening for us internally right now. Good or bad or neutral. And then we can open our eyes or bring our attention back to our class. So I don't know what your experience was there, but my experience was that I was not paying much attention to my body before we did that exercise. I was not so aware of that. I was not particularly paying attention to the internal experiences. But you know, there are things like, maybe you're still waking up a bit if you're on the West Coast like me. There's, maybe you're happy to be part of a group. Maybe you've got worries from your daily life that are on your mind as well. So when we take a bit of time like that, sometimes we become aware of things and bring them into our consciousness that were otherwise kind of present, but kind of in the background, kind of hidden. and sometimes they're really big, right? They're like the proverbial elephant in the room, like you say, oh, I'm still worrying about my son, or I'm still worrying about my friend, or I'm still thinking about work, or sometimes they can be big things, but maybe we didn't quite realize that they were still on our mind. If you were thinking or worrying about anything that's outside of this space right now, that's important to know about. That's important information because clearly those things aren't here right now. They're not here in the present moment. They are held in our imagination. They're held in our memory or our imagination. And so it sometimes it's always felt a bit trite to me, or like cliche to talk about being in the present moment. But I I realize that it is. My wife takes that as one of her main practices, and she again and again refers to how beneficial she finds it. I think I'm very conceptual, and so I'm always doing a lot of planning and thinking and so forth. But she's very focused on just being in the moment. And the really important thing to notice about being in the moment is that all of our future planning are ideas, they're concepts, but they exist in the present moment, and they have an emotional impact in the present moment. So if we think about something we're really worried about, in the present moment, we might start to get a bit tense, right? We might start to get a little bit agitated. Or if we think about a positive future, we might begin to feel a little bit relaxed. But the relaxation is happening right in the present moment. The emotional response to those ideas are happening right now. And similarly, if we think about the past, often we worry about the past. We miss, friends or activities that we haven't, you know, everyone's been doing a lot less traveling and visiting with friends probably than they were a year ago. If we think about missing activities in the past, our memory exists in the present moment. And it's fascinating to think about how we can get so caught up in our future thinking and our past thinking that we basically forget about what's happening right now. And it is I think it's, in my view, it is exactly the same experience as someone who's really getting into a TV show or getting into a video game. We just get sucked in, we get drawn in, and it is as if the entire rest of the world disappears. And we're just in that new world, right? And um, we forget about our bodies, we forget about the people around us, the situations around us. And now with everybody having smartphones and so forth, we can be absorbed in that world much of the time, if not all of the time. So back to this topic that I've mentioned previously, that we are storytelling primates, and that those two aspects are hugely important. The storytelling part is amazing, right? It's amazing that humans can tell the stories we can tell. We can create whole worlds and plan, remember, and discuss and share ideas, and we can work together as a group through those stories, right? So you guys have been coming back very regularly, and I'm enormously grateful. We're here together with these classes because we're part of this shared story. We're part of this shared story that we are participating in a meditation class together. And that's the story. And because we all have that idea that we're in this meditation class, it creates a sense of identity, and it allows us to do things as a group. And so every corporation, every organization, every movement, they're all based around stories. If people all accept the same stories, like we need to do this research project, or we need to, elect this political candidate, or build this company, or whatever it is, whatever's that common story that unites people. Stories are amazing, right? But we're storytelling primates, right? So at the same time that we're telling all these cosmic stories and amazing stories and caught up in the past and future, there's this poor animal here, which is us, right? There's this poor little animal being dragged around by these stories and being tense and being, you know, potentially being very stressed out animal. And if you think about if you think about yourself, our primate side, that we're very emotional animals. We need to be taking care of this animal that is ourself. We are actually part of nature, right? Taking care of nature starts with you. If you really want to respect the earth, if you really want to respect nature, and if you really want to live in harmony with nature, we need to start by living in harmony with the nature that is us. Um, we are an emotional creature. We're subject to stress, right? Just like animals in the forest are subject to, if their forest is being cut down, right? They're experiencing stress and fear. If there's wildfires, these animals are experiencing stress and fear. The stories that we tell ourselves can cause a lot of internal stress. And they can cause us to get caught up in stressful situations all the time that are actually just stories, and none of them are present in this present moment. And so the idea of coming back to present moment awareness, literally the bodily sense, the sense of your breathing, the sense of the feeling of your body, the sense of just checking, asking yourself, what are the emotions that I'm experiencing right now? Every bit of that is present moment experience. It's something that's happening right now. And as a result, it's not these stories. So we're not saying that you shouldn't tell stories. We're not saying you shouldn't plan, shouldn't remember, shouldn't think. And I think that's some of what made me a little bit uncomfortable about the idea, live in the moment, just live in the moment. And I'm always thinking, well, what about planning? What about thinking? What about discussing big ideas, powerful ideas? Great, do that, right? But make sure you can move easily in and out of those stories. Make sure you don't get caught up in those stories. Make sure you can always come back to the present moment. Make sure you're looking after this animal that is yourself. This um, secret confession. I've always wanted to have a pet monkey, and my friends from India always say, that's a terrible idea, right? Because they actually live with monkeys and they're so mischievous, right? And they're like, that terrible, terrible idea, right? But the good news is you do. You already do. And that's yourself, right? You are your own pet monkey. You need to look after yourself. So we need the fluency in our mind, the skill, the ease, and this is what emotional intelligence is. The intelligence to not just have this IQ that can remember all these stories, but to have an emotional intelligence that can be fully aware of our body, fully aware of our emotional states, identify them. And one of my favorite quotes, one of Ashley, my wife, and my teachers, he says, every emotional state, like a fear, anxiety, and so forth, is common human experience. And most of them, basically almost all of them are common to most creatures. Almost every creature can experience fear. Every creature can experience pain, fear, these kinds of things. Many of them can experience shame and grief and so forth as well. If they're the way you can know that everybody experiences the exact same emotions that you do, not necessarily in the same order, but the same kinds of emotions, is if there's a word for it. If there's a word for that emotion, guilt, that means that it's common experience, everybody's experience, right? If you can put a word to your emotion, it means that it's not unique to you. And one of the huge challenges we have is we have a sense of isolation all the time. We tend to feel very isolated from other people, and we tend to feel very special, like we have unique problems and struggles and sufferings that no one else can quite understand or experience. And in America, certainly, we celebrate uniqueness, right? We celebrate individuality, but it's a double-edged sword. The double-edged sword to that individuality is isolation, right? That when we are isolated from others, we're emotionally, it actually starves us emotionally. It causes us loneliness. The experience, to whatever degree we ever experience anything that looks a little bit like loneliness, that's because of that sense of isolation. The reality is we're all going through Well, we're all going through basically similar things, not necessarily in the same order, but we're not nearly as separate from others as we might think we are. And that's why a group like this, helps to connect with some kindred spirits. But any organization or group that we're part of, there's always some sense of connection and realizing that we're not that different from others. So coming back to the present moment, not getting caught up in my stories too much, but the present moment awareness, becoming aware of the present, allows us to return from those stories. It's like turning off the TV or turning off the video game in our mind and coming back to this present world, becoming aware of what our emotional state is. And then we begin to develop more fluency in moving between the present moment and our stories, moving between different emotional states. When we talking about emotional intelligence, the most powerful thing we can do is come back to the present moment, just become aware, just ask ourselves, what am I feeling right now? What am I experiencing right now? Then, not only becoming aware of our own internal state, beginning to identify and separate and distinguish different emotional states. Like, what is this feeling, right? Am I feeling worried? Am I feeling anxious? Anxious, very similar, obviously. Am I feeling angry, resentful? And putting some label or name to these mental states can be very, very powerful. It helps us to distinguish these different mental states that we're going through, these different emotional states. And then learning how to act appropriately on the basis of these different mental states. This is the third aspect of emotional intelligence, becoming aware of our own and others' mental states or emotional states and feelings, identifying, distinguishing, or labeling them, and then learning how to act appropriately on that basis. One thing that really struck me this week, partly through that course, that Search Inside Yourself course, but also because of an article I read on how to give good feedback that our HR director shared with my company. So how to give good feedback is that all of us are mentally unique in so many ways because of our genetics, because of our early childhood development, and because of all of our circumstances in the present and past. We're very mentally unique. We are mentally identical in so many ways, but we're unique. And so maybe a nice analogy is a plant or like a bush or a tree. The tree is overused, so let's go with bush. Right? Every bush, basically, the bushes of one species, they're all basically the same. The leaves are more or less the same shape, branches, bark looks more or less the same, but every one of them has a unique branching structure. And so, imagine these trees on the top of a sea cliff, right? They're always bent over to the side, right? A unique branching structure because of their environment, their unique uh, structure. So the idea of this branching is it's such a powerful analogy because that's the way our neurons work inside our brain. It's also the way our social relationships work. It's also the way almost everything in our world works, really, is through what's called network effects. So we all have certain areas of strength and certain areas of weakness. And so the traditional view of education is that we're all like an empty vessel. Like you just show up to kindergarten and then the teacher begins to talk through the numbers and the letters, and then you sort of just fill people up with knowledge that everybody is basically identical. And then we can approach meditation in the same way. Like we all show up with this class and then we just need to, receive a few instructions and then we'll know how to meditate and then we'll be able to meditate perfectly and then we can walk away and we'll be full of meditation knowledge and emotional intelligence. And then we'll be all better, right? All you need to do is just receive, 24 ounces of meditation instruction, fill it, put it in the tank of your head, and then you'll be off and running. But it doesn't work that way. We're all uniquely different, right? We have uniquely different worries, uniquely different strengths. Like these certain branches in our mind are places of strength we already have so many areas of strength, and we may have some areas of weakness or vulnerability. For example, a tendency towards anger, a tendency towards being impulsive, a tendency towards not, towards um, being a bit fearful of making decisions or whatever it is. We may have some weaknesses that we want to work on, but we need to work on those and approach those from our areas of strength, from our unique areas of strength right now. And so, what we can do in this next meditation, I'll set aside some time now. Maybe we spend a little bit less than 10 minutes now to meditate together. But we can think about what are the current challenges that we're facing in our life, but then what are the strengths that we have inside us? Where are the branches in our own mind already quite strong? And if we, instead of trying to think of tackling these challenging situations all at once in one fell swoop, we think, are there incremental improvements that I can make from my areas of strength right now that would help me to deal with these challenging situations a little bit better? If I'm more accepting of the reality of what I'm actually like right now, and more accepting of the reality of of whatever challenges I'm facing, are there small and incremental improvements that I could make, building on my strengths to better deal with difficult situations? So, what we can do is, again, return to some meditation, again, finding a comfortable position, and again, settling our body and beginning to become aware of the present moment. And how do we know what's in the present moment? The feelings in our body are one of the best indications. They only exist in the present moment. So we can ask ourselves, what are we feeling right now in this instant in our body? We can begin to feel our breathing, in particular within our body, how our body is stretching and relaxing with each breath. Perhaps making room for our breath to move and expand within our body. If we take a deep breath in, perhaps we can even feel it in our fingertips and in our toes. Just feeling that deep stretch. And as we breathe out, just feeling ourselves relax and settle back in. And we can try to send some kindness to ourselves, to our body, thinking that this body, our emotional state, it's with us every moment of every day. We're dragging our body around through all of these challenging situations we face. How well are we looking after our own body, our own emotional state? we can think we definitely need to be bringing kindness to ourselves, looking after ourselves, making sure that we're acting in harmony with the nature that is ourself, our body and emotions. We can send some kindness into our body. Perhaps there's part of our body feels a bit uncomfortable, maybe needs to stretch. Perhaps we can invite ourselves to relax, feel some sense of warmth and well-being. And just as we would always want a friend or pet to be relaxed, comfortable, we can ask, am I relaxed and comfortable? Is my own body and emotional state relaxed and comfortable? How can I help myself to feel at ease? And we can think back to whatever was on our mind at the beginning of this session, whatever was on our mind before we joined this class. And when we think about any of those challenges in our life, we can ask ourselves, does that have some effect on my body? Do I feel my body or emotional state changing at all if I bring to mind some of my normal thoughts and concerns? And then we can ask ourselves to deal more skillfully with the challenges that I normally face in my life. Are there areas of strength that I already have that would help me to approach my challenges better? Looking at what we do really well already, and looking at our ability to relax and become more grounded. Are there ways that we can make our challenges in daily life less overwhelming, less difficult, by building on the things that we're already good at? It's easy to get caught up in the worries about our challenges in life. But if we can approach them with incremental changes, building on the areas where we're already strong, how could that help us deal with whatever challenges we're facing in life? Then we can think just through this short time together, settling our mind, gaining new perspective. This small activity of coming here is a seed that could grow into much deeper, much bigger change, beneficial results for ourselves and others. So we can reflect on this and think, how could I use this brief seed, this short time together, to help nudge my life, my world in a more beneficial direction? Then we can open our eyes and arise for meditation. So I'd like to start doing something a little bit different for the coming sessions, which is to begin to do a bit of sharing. So I'm gonna stop the recording at this point, and then invite some opportunity while we're not recording to share anyone's insights or experiences from this time.